told our daughter her dad wasn't a real man. What he did to me next ruined everything. Hello, Reddit. My name is Amelia, and I'm 35 years old. I would be 36 in a few days' time, but that is not even my problem. When your daughter and her father, your own husband, now look at you as if you're a disgusting creature, nothing else would matter except trying to change the way they view you back to what it once was. And that's why I'm here. I need your advice, guys. I'm in big trouble. I'm at the verge of losing my entire life, and I'm so scared of that happening. I had an argument with my husband, Ethan, and I had been so angry and I felt really petty, and I had done a very stupid thing. I had told our 13-year-old daughter her dad wasn't a real man, but what he did to me next is unbelievable. Ethan had been angry when he heard me telling Ashley, our daughter, that he wasn't a real man, and he had just said right in front of our daughter that he was sure he was real enough. I was just being greedy. And then he spatted how he knew about the secret I had been hiding. I had been so shocked and hadn't known what to say to defend myself. I managed to squeeze out, "You're lying," desperately, but Ethan had done something worse.
Yeah.
He had brought out a picture and slammed it on the table, and before I could reach for it, Ashley had picked it up, and she had a look of horror and disgust on her face. I had quickly snatched the picture out of her hand, and when I saw what was in it, my hand had shook so hard I thought it was coming off. I couldn't believe it. I remembered the day because I was in it. I mean, I did do it, but I couldn't believe that Ethan had evidence to use against me, and he just did in front of our daughter. My world came crashing down at that moment. Ashley wouldn't let me come close to her, and Ethan would not even let me explain or apologize. I cannot begin to say how sorry I am that everything happened that way. But I cannot lose Ethan and Ashley. I would cease to exist without them. I guess I'd have to say a full story of what had happened between David, my supposed cousin, and I. David and I met long before I met Ethan at all. He had actually been a family friend. His family and mine had been really close, and we have since childhood been very close. And for the longest time, I had always addressed David as my cousin. We were very cool, and we hung out together all the time. People called us twins because of how often I was usually at his place and even slept over. We had the same group of friends, and so, even in school, although he had been a class ahead of me, we were the same age. I had to stay back a year when I got sick and had to have 3 different operations to correct what was wrong with my heart. I had 6 months of rehabilitation after that, so I couldn't go to school that year. So I was behind my classmates by a year. But David had never made me feel like that, and he was always with me during lunch breaks in school. And after school ended, we walked home together because our place was not all that far from school. One time, I had almost gotten harassed sexually by a big bully in high school. That day, I had decided to walk alone because I was upset over something David had said, and I regretted that decision. But luckily, David had walked in right at that moment and had helped me. Although he got beaten pretty badly, he saved me, and I had felt indebted to him. My first crush had been David, but he never knew. David had been the eye candy of girls in his class and even in other classes. He was quite popular, so he had his pick of girls, while I was the laid-back girl whom nobody knew as anyone except the girl he hung out with out of pity. And I did not have a banging body in high school. I had no big breasts that attracted guys, and my bottom was really flat. My hair curled so much that no matter how much I tried straightening it out, it never worked. So I felt insecure compared to David. David left for college before me, and I knew my crush was probably now only a fantasy because he would definitely be able to have more pics of girls, and that left me no chance at all. I decided to work on my body. I starved so I could grow thinner, and I kept visiting every hairdresser who could help my curls. I started even using some weird supplements I got from a random lady so I could grow some shape. But I'd been really upset when David had come home for his first summer break with 4 of his friends, his girlfriend included, and when he had noticed me, his comment had been, "Why do I look like I was starving myself to impress a boy?" I'd been so upset and hadn't hung out with him that whole summer. I avoided him at all costs. In fact, I had stopped going to his place and pretended to be busy until he had left again for school. I decided to end my long overdue crush on him, and I stopped trying to grow thin or straighten my curls. I started to embrace who I was. I even stopped taking the crazy supplements I got from that lady that always made me really hungry. And it was then my body seemed to have gotten the boost it needed. Within 6 months, I'd had a massive transformation from a kid into a full-blown lady. I grew curves in the right places, and my curls just decided to look so stylish, and my skin was just different. When David came home again, I was already out of high school and was hoping I got into the same school as David, not because I wanted to be with David at all times, but because the school just had the best equipment to teach me all I needed to know about art. I loved art so much. I just wanted to paint and paint. Whenever I started on the small pieces of art my parents got me to support my dreams, I could spend hours on them nonstop. David had seen me in my new transformation and had been really surprised by it. It seemed like his eyes had just opened to see who it was in front of him because David started to flirt with me outrageously, which he didn't ever do before. I enjoyed the attention and I let him do that. Well, it didn't take long for his wooing to get me interested again, and David and I started dating, but we kept it a secret from everyone. People couldn't have even guessed because if they saw us together, they always had before, so they thought of it as normal. David had been my first. He had had sex with me in my room with my parents downstairs with his. They had been discussing a neighborhood party, and David and I had gone upstairs like we always did when our parents had gotten into long conversations like that, and they hadn't thought anything out of place because they knew we always did that. Only this time it was different because David was able to tempt me enough to agree to sex with him. It had been really painful, and David hadn't been gentle at all. My first time experience had been rough and not enjoyable. I never admitted it to him, though. He had just pushed in without minding that it was my first time. It felt more like a rape than anything else. But I loved David so much I was willing to go through with it to give him pleasure. And all the sex we had while together had always been rough. He was either spanking me or roughly bending me over and digging into me to have sex. I never even knew that sex could be enjoyable for both partners until I met Ethan. I had always thought of it as something the female had to endure to give the male pleasure. Besides, I thought females found pleasure in other things like gifts and romantic gestures, which David was not short of. I had gotten into the same school as David, and our parents didn't think anything out of place when David and I told them we wanted to stay together. David was already the social butterfly when I got to school, so it was quite difficult for me to fit in, especially because he wanted me to hang out with the same crowd as he did. I spent the whole first year trying to adjust, but failed. David was not sensitive to my feelings, but I was still willing to go ahead with anything because of how crazily obsessed with him I was. In fact, David's friends did not ever know that he and I were dating. They thought of us as cousins, so his friends thought it normal to talk about the girls they slept with in front of David and me. David encouraged them. I knew he was sleeping around with other girls too, but I never said anything about it. He only gave me attention when he wanted to get down with me. I felt really small, and I had loads of insecurities, but I couldn't voice them out because he would never understand. The one time I tried to, David thought of me as just being paranoid and dismissed my worries and pain, so I never tried again after that. I got pregnant in school for David. David was never really one to have protected sex. When I found out about it, I panicked and told David, but he just called his parents, lied about needing money, and they sent it to him, and he gave it to me to get rid of it. I had been so shocked and pained, and I was angry with him and refused to take the money, but David persuaded me that we weren't ready for a kid yet. I eventually agreed and got rid of the baby. After I got rid of the baby, David paid no attention to me. In fact, it got worse. He wouldn't sleep with me anymore. I got desperate because I knew that even though he gave me no attention, he was still interested in me for my body, but this time he wasn't anymore. I tried everything I could to get him interested. I even tried seducing him, bought expensive lingerie with my savings, watched different porn videos on how to please a man, and took drugs to tighten my vagina and stuff. But David would get interested for a little while and then fall off the radar again. This continued until he graduated and I was left in school. I knew without a doubt that David already broke up with me in his mind, but I still kept pushing for us to work until he eventually told me we had to stop because no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see me as anything other than his sister and childhood friend. My grades took a hit, and everything in my world seemed to stop while everyone else seemed to be moving forward. I was so sad and unhappy, and the crazy thing was I couldn't even tell my parents what had happened because they never knew that anything happened between David and me. The painful part of everything was when my parents wanted to celebrate their wedding anniversary, and they invited friends over. I was there because it was obligatory, but I hadn't expected David to show up too, especially with a girl he introduced to the family as his girlfriend. The horror of having to pretend to be cool and smile at his girlfriend when he introduced me as his cousin, and having to pretend I was fine through the party was just too much. It took me a whole year before I eventually moved on from David, or so I thought. I graduated from school with good grades, luckily, and I started to teach art at a high school first so I could gather myself and get my workshop up and running. I steered clear of my hometown so I wouldn't have to come across David or anything to do with him. and I also deleted his number and anything that had to do with him. After a year of working as a school teacher, I was able to gather enough money to rent my workspace. So I quit the job and started my work as an artist. I got all the necessary equipment and materials, and I made art of my own. The first year was difficult, as expected. I couldn't get my work noticed. There were other famous artists with better experience than I had, so it was quite hard for me. I entered competitions not for the prize money, but so I could get some fame and people to patronize me. I usually ended up third or fourth in most competitions, and I got tired and was giving up until a man walked into my workshop and requested paintings for his office space in his house. I was so excited and happy. It was Ethan. He had seen my works through one of the competitions I participated in, and he loved my works, so he came looking to buy them. I was so happy to be noticed even though I didn't win the competition. I gave him a discount on every painting he bought, but he insisted on paying the full price and even added to it because, according to him, he appreciated art when he saw it. I helped move all the paintings he bought to his office and his house, and Ethan invited me for a lunch date the next day, insisting he really came for my artwork and not necessarily for the date, and that I could decline if I wanted to. I accepted the offer because of how genuine he sounded and went on the lunch date. I expected some fancy restaurant so he could impress me as usual, but I was surprised when he took me to a local restaurant he called his favorite place, and surprisingly, I enjoyed every dish we ate. More so, I enjoyed our conversation. We talked about many things and he seemed interested in me as a person and in my art. He just listened to me ramble on and on about myself. It made me feel special, and I knew I liked him from our very first date, but I was scared. I hadn't wanted it to be like it was with David, so I played it cool until he eventually asked me out, and I agreed. Ethan was definitely nothing like David. He was calm and cool with me. He listened, bought me things I needed before I even realized I needed them. He never stomped out during a fight expecting everything to fizzle and return to normal when he was back. He would stay, listen to my point of view, and explain his too. When we eventually had sex for the first time, he had been so gentle, as if I were a virgin, and I enjoyed every bit of it. Ethan was, and still is, my dream man. We were a year into our relationship when I got pregnant, and I had been so scared to tell him, thinking he'd have the same reaction as David. But I eventually mustered the courage to do so. Ethan had surprisingly been so happy, and he proposed immediately, telling me he had planned to on my 23rd birthday, but the baby clearly had other plans. I had been so happy, and he went with me to meet my parents and discuss our wedding plans. I'd been so nervous because I didn't want to see David at all, and knowing that the chances of meeting him when I visited my parents were very high. Luckily, he hadn't been around, and according to his parents, he had been out of the country. That pleased me because it meant he wouldn't be around for my wedding, which I wanted to have at my parents' place. Soon enough, Ethan and I got married, and we welcomed our baby girl, Ashley, into our world. Ethan had a workspace built by the house for me as a gift for bringing our baby into the world. He had every tool and material in there for me, too. It made me so happy and satisfied. Well, not totally. Despite how perfect our marriage seemed, with our child and all, I still felt like something was missing. I didn't know what, but I felt that way. I couldn't voice it to Ethan because, to him, he loved our perfect little trio, and he seemed content. I never told Ethan anything about what went on between David and me, though. I wanted that part of my life to stay buried as a secret forever. When Ashley was 8 years old, I started trying for another baby, even though Ethan seemed content with our one child. But I just felt like maybe another baby was the missing piece in my already perfect marriage. Luckily, I got pregnant, but unfortunately, it was an ectopic pregnancy, so I had to get rid of it. I had been so sad, and it took a lot of cajoling and promises of better luck next time to actually get me back on my feet. I kept trying for another baby, but it was like my body refused to carry another child to full term because I kept having miscarriages, and each time broke me more than the first. Eventually, Ethan adamantly decided that we were not trying for a baby again. I knew he made that decision for my sake, but it still pissed me off, and I kept picking fights with him over it. Ethan, being Ethan, understood me and would usually refuse to get into an argument with me. This continued until my artwork finally gained the recognition it needed. A famous influencer had bought my painting and made a video in her living room, where the artwork was in the background. This got people talking and wanting to know about the artist behind the work. I started getting orders for artworks, and I was really happy. I got too busy trying to keep up with my new fame and totally ignored my family. I was always too tired or too busy painting to spend time with my daughter, leaving her mostly with her father for entertainment. She adored her father so much, even more than she did me, so it felt easier to let her be with him. On some days, when I tried to spend time with her, it usually ended with her slamming her door shut in my face because I ended up nagging her for not doing things right. I felt like I needed to correct her, especially because her father spoiled her too much, and Ethan and I had several arguments about this. He once accused me of not spending time with our daughter or trying to understand her growing needs as a teenager. I'd been so angry because I knew he was telling the truth, but the fact that he pointed it out just made me furious. I didn't speak to him for days on end. He tried to talk to me and settle things, but I just wouldn't have it. I kept busy with painting and attending parties I was invited to by my clients rather than spending time with Ethan or Ashley. I felt they both didn't want me around anyway, so it was better I stayed out of their way. One day I was at home taking a break from painting, sipping my favorite champagne even though it was just morning. Ethan had gone to work and my daughter Ashley had gone to school, so I was home alone when I heard the doorbell ring. Wondering who it was, I went to open the door, and shockingly, it turned out to be David. After so many years, it was obvious age was telling on him. He wasn't as handsome and eye-catching as he was as a kid. We greeted each other warmly, and he told me he had come back to the country to take a break. He explained that he had just gone through a brutal divorce that stripped him of all his money and also of his kids. His wife was apparently granted full custody of their 2 kids. When I asked why his wife felt the need to do all of that to him, he told me she had been seeing another man, and when he caught her, she decided to turn everything around. I pitied him, and when he told me he didn't have anywhere else to go, he turned to me because he didn't want to go back to living with his parents. He had gotten my contact and house address from my parents when he lied, saying he just wanted to come visit and say hi. I pitied him so much that I offered him a place to stay until he was able to get himself together. I hadn't even informed Ethan about the new development before I made my decision, and David moved in immediately. He only had one bag with him, and he settled in the guest room right by my daughter's room. Ashley noticed the strange man in our house first, and when she questioned me about him, I told her he was just my cousin visiting. Ethan had been a bit angry that I made the decision without informing him first. Even though he wouldn't turn David away after I told him parts of the story about his brutal divorce and maintained the story of him being my cousin. I shrugged off his anger because I felt it wasn't necessary. I was not going to turn David away when he needed me. That was how David started to live with us, and despite what he had told me about wanting to gather himself so he could leave quickly, he never went out of the house in search of a job or anything. He would stay indoors all day and sleep. He only came out to eat and then went back to sleep. At first, I thought it was because he was still overwhelmed by the whole thing and left him to do his thing. But I saw the way Ashley stared at him, irritated by his presence everywhere in the house. So I took matters into my own hands and looked for a part-time job for him. When I told David about the part-time job I got him, instead of the gratitude I had expected, David was livid and told me I could have just told him he was a bother instead of going as far as insulting him with a petty job offer. I was shocked and confused, but I later apologized and told him to do whatever worked for him. David apologized for getting mad at me and gave the excuse of still trying to process everything before gathering himself, and I accepted his explanation. David continued living in our house for 2 whole months without doing much. It was obvious Ethan and Ashley weren't comfortable with him around, but I still hadn't wanted to turn him away. So I started insisting he spend some time with me in my workspace. I thought maybe if he saw me work, he'd get interested in doing something with his life. We started spending time together at my workspace, but instead of working as I usually would, David distracted me by flirting with me outrageously. Normally, when I worked, I was hardly distracted. Even Ethan knew to leave me with my work because I snapped easily when distracted. But David managed to distract me from my paintings. He would come into my workshop to feed me fruits seductively. Sometimes he'd beg me to watch movies with him because he was bored, and when I agreed, they were usually movies with very sexual scenes in them. I knew he was purposely trying to turn me on, and stupidly, I just entertained his antics. Seducing me was quite easier than he must have thought because the second time he tried to kiss me, I accepted and allowed him. The first time had been different. I reminded him that I was married and was not that girl he could have any time he wanted, and he tried convincing me, making up excuses as to why he broke up with me back then. I obviously believed his excuse like the fool I was, and when he tried another time to kiss me, I didn't object. Before long, we started sleeping together. It was easy because Ethan went to work every day and Ashley to school. David was still a rough lover and had once left a mark on my butt, which Ethan noticed when I was taking a bath the next day in our bathroom and he walked in. When he asked about it, I lied that I had hit my butt on the door and hadn't known it left a mark. Ethan didn't say anything about it again, and when I checked the mark on my butt, it looked almost like a handprint, and I felt lucky that Ethan hadn't examined it closely. Well, my secret didn't stay secret for too long because Ethan found out about my affair and exposed it in the most terrible way. Before that day, I had decided that David had to leave the house because he was getting too bold with our affair, and I couldn't lose my marriage over a fleeting relationship with David. One time, he came into the kitchen while I was putting dinner together and slapped my butt. Ashley walked in at that point, and I had to pretend I was busy with what I was doing while David went to the fridge and grabbed a juice can. Another time, he came into my workspace and started making out with me, and that time, it was Ethan who almost caught us. I used some of my savings to get him a house, and he moved out. I went there to see him whenever I chose. But on that particular horrible day, Ethan and I got into an argument. I was complaining that he hadn't been in a good mood lately, and that he wasn't doing enough as the man in the relationship. Usually the calm one and always trying to settle our quarrels, Ethan flared up and shouted at me. I was shocked, and then the shock turned into more anger. Unfortunately, we were arguing right in front of Ashley, who just stood there watching us. Feeling petty and angry, I told Ashley right in front of her father that he wasn't a real man. I don't know why I thought so foolishly, but I guess at that moment, I hadn't been thinking at all. Ethan, probably feeling very insulted, retaliated in the worst possible way by exposing what I thought was my safe secret right in front of our daughter. He had just said right in front of her that he was sure he was real enough. I was just being greedy, which was why I decided to cheat and sleep with my so-called cousin. Now neither of them wants to hear anything from me. They both detest my very presence, and I can't even reach out to them anymore. Ethan decided to travel down to his parents' place, and Ashley insisted on going with him. I knew it was because of me. Although Ashley adored her grandparents, she never spent more than 2 days there, and now she insisted on going for a 2-week vacation with her dad. I can't lose them both. I'm losing my mind. Please help me. How do I get them to forgive my infidelity? Update. Hello, Reddit. If I'd felt bad before coming on this app to express myself and seek advice from you all, then I feel worse now. If there's another word beyond worst in English, then I probably would be feeling that now. I thought of this as my last resort, but clearly I was wrong because you guys told me exactly where to stuff my reconciliation attempts. I feel so horrible and disturbed. I cannot believe I destroyed my perfect family all by myself, destroying everything Ethan and I had worked for. If there's another word to replace dumb, then it should be me. I am so dumb and stupid. How could I have thought that cheating on Ethan, especially with someone like David, was the best thing to do? David, that liar and terrible cheat. Apparently, the story he spun for me about his wife was a lie. He had actually been ordered to stay away from his wife and kids because he had been extremely abusive. He had also lost everything because it all belonged to his wife in the first place. He was a serial cheat and made no effort to hide his affairs. When I heard that from his parents, who were so mad at him that they cut him off, my heart was in my throat. It brought back the memories of what he did to me back in school, and I realized just how stupid I am for letting him back into my life to do the same thing again. Destroy me. Back then, at least, I came back from what he did to me, or rather, what I allowed him to do to me. I was able to move on, and I landed myself the best man I could ever have prayed for. But this time, I don't think there's any coming back from this. I've ruined myself, my life. My only daughter sees me as a cheat and a terrible mother and wants nothing to do with me. My husband of almost 14 years wants a divorce and wants absolutely nothing to do with me. I really am doomed. I cannot believe I was so foolish to fall for David's antics again. I cannot even blame him anyways. If I hadn't brought him into my home and allowed him to seduce me into cheating, then I probably wouldn't be in this mess right now. I feel like I'm drowning so badly, this weight of guilt too heavy on my shoulders. I regret so deeply everything I did to hurt Ethan and Ashley. Ethan had been the perfect husband, and yet I pushed him away all the time. I kept pushing until I finally pushed him to a point where he wouldn't turn back. My several texts left unread, my several calls left unanswered, have made it dawn on me just how alone I am now. I've lost everything important to me over something as fleeting as an affair. I cannot get over the look of shock and disgust on Ethan's and Ashley's faces when they stared at me after finding out about my affair. It breaks my heart every moment I remember that I am no longer part of our perfect three. It's now a perfect 2. I feel so alone with no one on my side, and it's totally my fault. This pain feels just too much for me. I wonder if there's a way to stop feeling like this. I know there probably isn't, and if there was, I would never accept it because I know that this pain is the punishment for having destroyed my family with my own selfish act. Living like this is so tortuous, and I cannot even begin to imagine how the rest of my life would look without the 2 people I love the most. Update. Hello Reddit, it's me again. This is probably my last post here. I'm sure you guys are already tired of my sob story, but I had no one else to talk to, and regardless of what you think of me, this is the only place I can express myself. It's been a few months, a few awful months, without my husband and child in the picture. Or is it without me in the picture? Time has not made it better, but rather it has made it worse and more painful for me. Every waking moment is filled with regrets and wishes that will never be granted. I cannot even bring myself to paint anymore. The last time I tried, I just painted a painful picture that hurt even more. My paintings had always been happy and full of life, and now they are filled with emptiness and dark sorrows. The perfect description of me now. I really wish I hadn't done the things I did to ruin my marriage. Probably I would still be happy with a beautiful child and a satisfied husband. Nothing would be more fulfilling than having that with me right now. I wish I had known the end from the beginning. I would have never allowed David anywhere near me or my family, and I would have been a better wife and mother. But now it's all too late, and I am sadly not in possession of a time machine. I feel so empty on the inside, yet I feel a lot of emotions at the same time. All I can say is that it all hurts. Really, really hurts. I used to wonder what women who thought it wise to cheat on their partners felt like while doing it. I was always against their husbands forgiving them. Now that I know what it's really like, I feel like the stupidest person on earth for having followed that same path. I wish I had never been as stupid as I was, allowing David to ruin my life a second time. Now I've ended up alone and without anyone. I'm in the hell of my own making, sadly. I hope you guys, regardless of how much you hate me, learned something from me. It wouldn't be fun making the same mistakes as I did, letting the devil come into your home. Thanks and goodbye.